Chapter 775 Michael vs. Royal Princess 2. For one, they knew there was another undead that even the teachers and the academy higher-ups did not dare let the young elves challenge. It was said to be at the peak of rank 3, but its actual combat capabilities could be said to touch the higher realm, as long as those beings did not use their unique abilities. That alone was already impressive and terrifying. The fact that all of this belonged under the belt of a youth who was not only younger than them by many years, but had also not yet ascended his rank, was difficult to accept. Elves were proud, but that did not mean they were completely blinded. A human youth like Michael was different from an elven youth. Here, age carried a meaning very different from what other races might understand. Among elves, maturity was not measured by height, physical build, or even appearance. It was measured by time lived. In that sense, it was similar to other races, except that the natural longevity of elves meant that even their commoners lived longer than many supernaturals. By elven standards, 50 years marked the threshold of young adulthood. Before that, an elf was considered a child, regardless of how capable or intelligent they might appear. That belief was not symbolic. It was ingrained. For an elf under 50, their judgment, restraint, and sense of consequence were believed to still be forming. And because elves aged slowly, their bodies reinforced that idea. At 50, most elves still looked little different from human teenagers, or young adults. Because they looked young, they believed they were young. Because they were told they were young, they acted as if experience still lay far ahead of them. That mindset shaped everything. The fact that awakeners in this realm were only chosen at the age of 48 to 50 only reinforced that belief. True adulthood, in the eyes of elven society, did not truly begin until well past 100. And so, the elves gathered below, whispering and watching, all shared one thing in common. They were all at least 50 years old. Some were 60, some 70. A few had already passed 100. Yet to one another and to the academy itself they were still considered young. That was why their reactions were so heavy. The elven worldview had always rested on one quiet certainty. Time favored them. Given enough decades, they would inevitably surpass shorter-lived races. So why were they being suppressed by a youth who, by elven standards, had barely begun his life? He was not even present, which only filled the prideful elves with further indignation. "These little elves are quite interesting," Selim said at last, his voice light. "Especially that one who just fought your undead. His law is still crude, but the interpretation is clever. Given time, he might become something worth remembering." The old woman's fingers twitched. Had anyone else spoken of the academy students in that tone, she would have corrected them, silenced them, or reminded them exactly where they stood. But the words came from someone older than most of the elves present below, someone who stood on the same level as her rather than beneath it. She clicked her tongue instead, sharp and restrained. "Careful," she said coolly. Selim chuckled softly. A calm voice carried across the gray field. "That's enough." The words were not loud, yet they cut through the space with unsettling clarity. The elves below startled. Conversations died mid-sentence. Several figures flinched, heads snapping up as instinctive caution rippled through the group. For a brief moment, confusion reigned. Then they saw them. 3 figures hovered above the field. The sanctuary supervisor stood at the center, her expression composed and unreadable. Beside her was an unfamiliar presence, tall and relaxed, his bearing refined in a way that made even seasoned elves tense instinctively. Slightly behind them stood a third figure, a half-elf. The sight made several elves hesitate. The sanctuary supervisor was well known for her dislike of half-elves, so seeing her so close to one came as a surprise. But every elf present reacted at once. They bowed to show respect. "Greetings." The words echoed softly across the field. The sanctuary supervisor gave a small nod in response, acknowledging them. "Since the human whose undead you have been fighting has already awakened," she said evenly, "there is no need to continue this demonstration. Return to your training." Her gaze swept across the field, sharp and final. None of the elves argued. None dared to question her decision. As the group began to disperse, murmurs threatening to rise again, new voice spoke. "So this is the holy child everyone has been talking about." The tone was curious, almost amused. The elves froze. Only then did understanding fully sink in. The unfamiliar figure, hovering beside the supervisor, was not merely an observer. Several elves stiffened when they finally saw who had spoken. Then, without hesitation, they bowed again, deeper this time. "Greetings, Your Royal Highness." A ripple passed through the air. First there was nothing. Then space folded in on itself, and a figure stepped out of what had been empty air only a moment before. She was an elf. Tall and slender, her presence was calm yet unmistakably heavy. Her hair flowed like pale moonlight down her back, silver so pure it bordered on white, adorned with a simple circlet etched with patterns. She wore layered robes of deep green and gold. Behind her, several guards emerged in silence, each one radiating restrained strength. The moment she appeared, every elf present stiffened. "Greetings, Your Royal Highness," they said in unison. Michael glanced around instinctively. Even the rank for elf lowered her head, posture respectful and restrained. There was no reluctance. In the motion, only acknowledgement of authority that could not be ignored. Michael hesitated. He had no issue bowing. Drawing attention was the last thing he wanted, especially in a place like this. He shifted slightly, preparing to follow suit. Then a voice sounded directly in his mind. "Stay still." Chapter 776 Michael vs. Royal Princess 3. Michael froze. The voice was calm, steady, and unmistakably belonged to the old man beside him. "Do not bow." Michael's brow tightened slightly, but he did not argue. The old man had not bowed either. Given his rank, that much made sense. More importantly, Michael trusted that the old man knew better than to put him in danger for no reason. So he stayed still. Below, the royal elf's gaze swept across the field, composed and observant. It lingered briefly on the sanctuary supervisor, then shifted toward the hovering figures near her. Her eyes paused for the faintest moment. There, Michael felt it. Even concealed, it was as if her gaze brushed past him without truly seeing him, yet still acknowledged that something was there. A faint smile curved her lips, though the old man's expression remained relaxed, almost indifferent. There was nothing casual about the thoughts moving beneath it. At first, he had resisted the idea, but after days of observation, hesitation, and silent deliberation, he had finally come to accept a possibility he had once dismissed. Michael could pass as the holy child of their realm. If he grew far stronger than the other candidate, he could very well be recognized as the chosen one of the realm. That acceptance was the reason his attitude toward Michael had softened. It was why he had begun speaking more, guiding more, intervening when before he would have simply watched. Even so, he had not changed his mind about one thing. Michael would not be left under the academies. They had too much freedom, too little restraint, far too many agendas that shifted with political winds. Whatever interest they claimed to have in nurturing talent, it was never without strings. The Federation, on the other hand, that was where Michael would go. He was relieved that Michael had awakened earlier than expected. It meant he could begin moving him immediately, before too many eyes settled on him. The old man had already planned everything. A major event had occurred in Hell, something large enough that the Federation would absolutely be aware of it. And if the Federation knew, then the academies would not be far behind. Given what Michael had already shown, anyone with sense, especially his academy, would realize that letting him remain here unchecked was a mistake. They would come. He was certain of it. The only reason they had not already appeared was because the situation itself had been unusual. The elves had been willing to open their gates to bring Michael here. That courtesy had not been extended to anyone else. No other party had been allowed physical passage. Messages, however, were another matter. Over the past few days, he had acted as a middleman, relaying information selectively, filtering what passed through and what did not. He had believed that when the moment came, he would simply take Michael and leave. Then the royal family's interest appeared. His gaze flicked briefly toward the silver-haired figure who had just arrived. He could only hope it was harmless curiosity from a single individual and not that the elves had decided to become petty after losing so badly. Michael studied the silver-haired elf openly. Unfortunately, that same calm scrutiny stirred discomfort among some of the elves below. A few frowned. Others stiffened slightly, offended by what they interpreted as improper boldness. To them, a concealed figure daring to look directly at a royal bordered on disrespect. Yet Michael saw nothing wrong with it. He was not staring challengingly, nor was he judging. He was simply looking. The old man beside him did not react, nor did several of the higher-ranked elves who noticed. To them, this was acceptable. A holy child was not bound by the same unspoken rules. Michael, unaware of the undercurrent and accustomed to noble circles in the land of origin, continued thinking. The elven royal system was flexible. Unlike human kingdoms, where a single bloodline ruled until overthrown, elven authority was shared. The ruling party could consist of 3 families or 5, sometimes more. What mattered was not the number, but whether those families met the required foundation. Strength, legacy, influence, and stability. Those who possessed enough of these became pillars of the realm. Which families held actual control shifted over time. Whichever house held the greatest advantage in a given era, whether through power, alliances, or exceptional individuals, naturally took the lead. Since this elf was addressed as a royal princess, Michael wondered where she stood within that structure. Was she from the current ruling family, or one of the major houses? The silver-haired elf inclined her head slightly. I am Eloria Lysandriel Feltherian of the Moonweave Court, daughter of the Verdant family, and bearer of the Silver Bow, she said calmly. The name flowed on far longer than Michael expected. It carried layered titles, ancestral acknowledgments, and symbolic roles woven together into a single introduction. Each segment seemed to carry weight, history, and obligation. Several of the elves below straightened subtly as she spoke, their expressions shifting with each added designation. By the time she finished, silence had settled across the field. Michael processed it quietly. It was long, uncomfortably long if he was being honest. He doubted he could repeat even half of it correctly. Still, he found the culture behind it interesting. Yet despite listening carefully, Michael gained no clear answer to his earlier question. The name alone did not tell him whether she belonged to the current ruling family or one of the major houses. Eloria's gaze lingered in his direction again, patient and curious, as if waiting. Michael hesitated only briefly. She had introduced herself. Anything less in response would be discourteous. I'm Michael Norman, he said simply. The contrast was stark. Just a name. Seeing the reaction of the elves to that name, for the first time in his life, Michael felt a flicker of embarrassment. He wondered if next time he should add some flowery words to it. However, just as his thoughts began to drift elsewhere, he heard something that made him stiffen. I cannot help but wonder if Sir Michael might be interested in doing something with me. *n. I don't even have any excuses. Chapter 777 Michael vs. Royal Princess 4. I can't help but wonder if Sir Michael is interested in doing something with me. For a split second, the expression on Michael's face changed. The words from the royal princess felt a bit misleading. However, when he saw the plain expressions of those around him, he realized he was the only one who had interpreted it that way. I need to wash my mind clean. Since he could not make the royal princess wait, he answered immediately. If it is within my power, and it is something I can do without issue, I might be able to fulfill your request. Since he was in another realm and was currently conversing with one of the most important people in that realm, Michael remained cautious. Eloria smiled. There is no need to be cautious, she said gently. I believe this is something you can do. If anything, her words only made Michael more wary. He did not let it show. Instead, he inclined his head slightly and asked, May I know what it is you have in mind, Your Royal Highness? Her smile widened just a fraction. I would like us to have a battle. The reaction was immediate. A sharp intake of breath rippled through the field. Several young elves stiffened outright, their eyes widening in disbelief. Even a few instructors lost their composure for a moment, their expressions flickering between shock and confusion. Aside from ritual duels or formal royal exhibitions, royalty did not fight openly. Certainly not with outsiders, or at least very rarely. A murmur spread. Had the human offended her somehow? Michael himself was taken aback. He recovered quickly, but his response was honest. With all due respect, he said calmly, that would not be possible. Eloria tilted her head slightly, curious. You believe so? Yes, Michael replied. Your Royal Highness has already ascended. You have become one with the universe. Your rank is far above mine. I have only just taken a step toward that realm. To be honest, Michael himself also thought he might have offended the princess. He believed she was being petty, perhaps trying to save face. Eloria shook her head softly. That is not what I meant, she said. We need not battle one another, she continued evenly. Our summons will suffice. Understanding spread through the field almost immediately. Murmurs shifted in tone, surprise giving way to acceptance. Several instructors exchanged looks and nodded to themselves. I am a beast tamer, Eloria added. And you are still at a stage where testing yourself directly against those who have already ascended would offer little benefit, especially if I am not teaching you anything. That explained everything. No wonder she had spoken as though a direct clash was unnecessary. She commanded beasts. Michael commanded undead. A battle between summons was not only appropriate, it was expected. Both sides possessed rank 3 entities, and neither lacked for quality. Michael inclined his head slightly in acknowledgement. Outwardly, he remained calm. Inwardly, however, something sat wrong. It was not the idea of a summons battle. That was fine. What unsettled him was the way she spoke, as though a battle between them personally had never been a consideration to begin with. Michael was not a prideful person by nature, but he did have pride. He did not look down on rank 3 supernaturals. They were above him in rank, yes, but that was all. Rank alone did not define everything. He had already killed many beings at that level. Did she think his refusal earlier had been fear? Michael had originally planned to avoid any direct involvement with members of the royal family, especially someone like Eloria. But as the situation unfolded, he found that the idea no longer felt like a bad thing. More than that, this would be his first time encountering a true beast tamer of her caliber. That alone made it worthwhile. Only Michael knew the truth of his own thoughts. He lifted his gaze slightly and asked, how will the battle be conducted? Eloria looked at him for a moment, then replied evenly, you may decide. The words were polite, reasonable, and yet the tone carried something else. It was the tone of someone offering a junior the freedom to make a harmless decision. If age and rank were all that mattered, she was not wrong. Still, Michael did not like it. He showed none of that discomfort. In that case, he said calmly, 3 against 3 would be suitable. Each of us may field 2 summons. The reaction was immediate. A wave of surprise rippled through the elves below. The old man beside Michael turned his head slightly, glancing at him. From the corner of his eye, he said nothing. After a brief moment of thought, he looked away again. Eloria's smile faded. Do you understand what you are proposing? She asked, her voice still calm but sharper now. Michael nodded once. I do. She studied him for a few seconds longer, then said simply, very well. Around them, the younger elves made no effort to hide their disdain. To them, this was absurd. They knew of the other undead under Michael's control, one that even the instructors and academy higher-ups refused to allow the younger elves to face. It was said to be at the peak of rank 3, yet its true combat capability was believed to touch the higher realm, so long as it did not unleash its unique ability. That alone was terrifying. But did he think the princess was less capable than him? This was a royal princess of the elven realm. Did someone who possessed no personal power, aside from holding many undead and unique ones at that, truly believe the princess would be lacking? So that's the human, one elf muttered, eyes narrowing. The one hiding behind corpses. Hiding is the right word, another replied quietly. Without those undead, what is he exactly? A necromancer who forgets his place, someone scoffed. To suggest himself against her royal highness. Who does he think he is? Chapter 778 Michael versus Royal Princess 5. And yet he speaks as if he stands on equal ground. Another voice added, sharper this time. A faint snort followed. Lower races always mistake borrowed strength for their own. The old man's gaze shifted. His eyes settled on the elf who had spoken last. Then the air changed. The elf stiffened. His breath caught before he could stop it. The color drained from his face as instinct screamed danger. His legs nearly locked, knees trembling as if they no longer remembered how to stand. For a heartbeat, true fear showed in his eyes. He swallowed hard. But then he noticed it. The instructors around him had not reacted. The sanctuary supervisor remained silent. No reprimand followed. No pressure descended from above. The fear hesitated, and hesitation gave way to something else. The elf straightened. He lifted his chin, forcing his spine upright, and slowly met the old man's gaze. His eyes were sharp now, challenging, provocative, as if daring him, as if saying, go on, do it, see who stops you. The pressure vanished. The old man did nothing. No threat, no warning, no retaliation. The elf smiled. Michael saw all of it. The exchange lasted only seconds, but it told him more than hours of observation ever could. So this was why the elves had such a reputation. A junior dared provoke a rank 4, and the elders did nothing. And suddenly, the old man's earlier instruction made perfect sense. Do not bow. Michael had thought, at first, that remaining upright would draw attention, that it might be interpreted as arrogance. He was wrong. If he had bowed, it would not have been seen as humility. It would have been seen as confirmation. Confirmation that, as a non-elf, he was expected to lower his head regardless. Expected to conform. Expected to know his place. Michael felt a faint sense of relief. He was glad now that he had not bowed. Eloria's gaze remained on Michael. Then tell me, she said calmly, which undead will you be using? The field quieted. Michael did not answer immediately. The air behind him shifted. Two presences emerged without sound. Spartan stepped to Michael's right. On the other side, Ghost appeared. Several elves flinched without realizing why. A ripple ran through the field. The murmurs stopped. Some of the instructors stiffened. Others narrowed their eyes. A few younger elves took an involuntary step back. So those are two of them, Eloria said, her tone even. Her eyes lingered briefly on Spartan, then on Ghost. Interesting choices. Michael finally spoke. These two will participate, he said simply. Eloria nodded slowly. Very well, she said. Then I will prepare my own. Her gaze flicked once more to Michael, thoughtful. This should be instructive for you to learn something, she added. Smoothly. Michael did not respond to her words. He watched as Eloria lifted her hand to the small bag resting at her waist. The moment his eyes settled on it, recognition struck. A spatial container. Not the common type meant for objects, but one designed for living beings. Michael's gaze sharpened slightly. He had seen similar items before. Rare. Expensive. Restricted. Containers capable of sustaining living creatures without harming their vitality, allowing beasts to remain dormant yet ready to be summoned at will. He had once seriously considered acquiring one himself. Not out of necessity, but for convenience. Even with undead, such an item would have been invaluable for long-term storage and concealment. He had not been able to get one, first due to insufficient money, and later because he had obtained something better. Eloria's fingers brushed against the bag, and mana stirred. It was subtle and refined, with nothing wasted. The container responded instantly, runes along its surface flickering briefly before sinking back into silence. Eloria's voice cut through the tension. "I will summon 2 as well," she said calmly. "Both rank 3 like yours." She paused, then added almost casually, "Do not worry, they are obedient." Michael did not relax. If anything, his focus sharpened. He knew the beasts of the royal princess could not be ordinary. They might be as unique as his legion, but he refused to believe they would be anything less. They were either equal or superior. As Michael watched the royal princess prepare to release her summons, one thought settled firmly in his mind. Whatever emerged from that container would not be enough to make him regret standing upright. Eloria turned the bag slightly, angling its mouth toward the open field. The space inside warped. For a brief moment, it looked as though the opening held an entire world behind it. Then she moved her fingers in a simple motion and released the seal. The first beast came out like water slipping from a cup. It was small, barely the size of a large dog, with a sleek body and a head shaped like a narrow, elegant spear. Its scales shimmered with a soft sheen, smooth and clean, like wet stone under moonlight. Along its back ran thin fins that rippled even though there was no wind, and the moment it landed, a cool mist spread across the gray grass. The air around it felt damp. Michael's eyes narrowed slightly. A water-type beast? The creature lifted its head, and its pale eyes swept across the field, without fear. Then it looked at Eloria and lowered itself slightly, respectful. Eloria did not pause. She reached into the container again. The second beast came out. The ground shifted as it stepped forward, and the gray grass flattened beneath its feet. It was huge, not merely large but built like a moving wall. A hulking beast with thick limbs and a broad chest, its hide layered in overlapping plates that looked like stone armor grown naturally from his body. Its head was lowered as it emerged, horns curving backward like carved pillars. Several elves below swallowed. The beast let out a low breath, and the sound rolled across the field, like distant thunder. Michael stared. Eloria's summons were not ordinary, as expected. Chapter 779 Monster Run. Michael studied the 2 beasts carefully, his expression unchanged. The smaller one moved smoothly, its body shifting like water. The fins along its spine moved constantly, and mist spread around it. Its scales darkened near the spine and lightened toward the underbelly. The mist it produced spread low across the ground. Its eyes were pale, almost colorless. The beast held itself alert. It watched everything, including him. Then there was the second beast. It was massive, twice the height of a grown man at the shoulder, with limbs as thick as tree trunks. Stone-like plates covered its body, each piece interlocking with the next. The plates were rough and weathered. Its horns curved back from its skull, and its eyes were deep amber. They sat beneath a heavy brow. Eloria stood between them, calm, one hand resting at her side. "These 2 will suffice," she said evenly. Eloria's gaze moved briefly to each beast in turn. "The smaller one is of the Tidevale lineage," she said calmly. "A water aspect race known for control, adaptability, and endurance." As if in response, the mist around the creature thickened slightly, clinging to the ground like a shallow tide. The beast remained still, its fins wavering, its body relaxed but alert. "They mature slowly," Eloria continued, her tone even, "but their upper limits are high. Given time and proper guidance, a Tidevale can step beyond my realm without difficulty." Her eyes shifted to the towering beast behind her. "This one is a stone-bound colossus," she said. "A strength-oriented race. Their bodies grow denser as they advance, and their foundation is naturally stable. Once fully matured, few races can match them head-on." She looked back at Michael then, her expression composed. "Both races possess the capacity to reach higher than I have," she said simply. Michael did not respond. Is she trying to show off? Or is this normal here? He was confused and did not know which it was. If it was the former, he would admit that the 2 creatures did not look ordinary, but he did not think they were more than that. Was ascending to rank 4 really so difficult? Of course it was. The fact that these two could still rely on their racial potential meant they were already at the peak of an extraordinary race, or perhaps even an epic-grade creature. Michael did not use detect since they would sense it. He could use his eye of truth, but he was not proficient enough to determine racial rank at a glance. In any case, he knew that ascending to rank 4 was not a small matter. He himself was not even at that level yet, so it was not something he could dismiss lightly. As for his undead, was ascending to that rank actually difficult for them? Maybe it would take them some time to reach the peak of rank 3 through accumulation from their law cultivation. But after reaching that point, he could simply merge other materials into them or evolve them directly, and they would ascend. Michael felt that the last thing one could use to show off to him was racial potential. And if this was simply normal here, a way of stating one's assets without deeper meaning, then he was not sure what response was expected of him. In the end, he chose to ignore it. Michael glanced around the field. "Are we doing this here?" he asked calmly. Eloria did not answer immediately. Her eyes swept across the surrounding elves, the instructors, and the open space beyond them. She did not give an order, nor did she raise her voice. She did not need to. One of the instructors reacted immediately. "Clear the area," he said sharply. The response was instant. Elves began moving without argument, stepping back in practiced coordination. Within moments, the space opened. Gray grass lay flattened where people had stood only seconds earlier. The ground was wide, unobstructed, and silent. Michael and Eloria remained at the center. Spartan and Ghost stood behind Michael, unmoving. The tide veil rested low to the ground, mist drifting around its body. The stone-bound colossus planted its feet, its weight settling into the earth. When the last elf stepped clear, the field felt vast. Eloria returned her gaze to Michael. "This will suffice," she said evenly. Michael nodded. "I'm ready," he said. Eloria's expression did not change. She simply lifted her hand, slightly as if granting permission. "Then you should take the first move," she replied. Michael did not waste time. His eyes sharpened, and the moment his intent solidified, the space around him seemed to twitch. Then he vanished. For a heartbeat, the center of the field held only Spartan and Ghost, still as statues. The tide veil's mist drifted lazily. The stone-bound colossus did not even shift its weight. Eloria remained where she was, posture relaxed, gaze forward. And then Michael reappeared, hundreds of meters behind her. He hit the gray grass hard, shoulder first, then rolled, then bounced, then rolled again. Each impact dug shallow grooves into the dull earth, sending up thin sprays of pale soil. It was a ragdoll, violent and ugly. His limbs pulled by momentum, he could not stop. Michael tried to brace, but his body did not listen in time. He rolled again, scraping through the grass. Only after several rotations did the motion finally begin to die. He slid another few meters, spinning once more on his side, then dragged to a halt, leaving a messy trail behind him. For a brief second, he stayed where he was, palm pressed to the ground, chest rising and falling. Damn, what kind of law almost kills its owner? Since he considered himself the weaker party, and since the other side was clearly strong, at least no weaker than the peak of rank 3, Michael decided to go all out to even the field. The only way this was possible, while still maintaining an advantage, was to use his law of echoed existence. This law allowed him to copy almost anything his undead possessed, or anything connected to him, extending even to their laws. Chapter 780 Monster 2. Since he was clear-headed now, unlike his first use of his law where he had no choice but to select beginning traits for survival, Michael wanted to experiment and see the true potential of his law and its efficiency. He chose to start with wisdom first. Currently, wisdom could be fully classified as a space-type beast. Its passive state, which Michael found particularly attractive, was the infinite energy granted by its connection to the void and the speed amplifier it possessed. When Michael echoed wisdom into his existence, the law would surely weaken and change slightly to match him, but the foundation would remain the same. Michael had already been fast before all this, but he did not expect the level of speed he could achieve. So even though Michael was in pain from ragdolling himself, his heart was still beating fast with excitement. For a moment the field did not breathe. Elves who had been whispering earlier stood frozen, mouths half open, eyes widened as if their minds could not decide whether what they had seen was real. Even some of the instructors stiffened, their instincts flaring far too late. The distance was not small. He had vanished from the center and appeared far behind her in the time it took a thought to form. And the speed that followed was worse. A ripple of fear passed through the crowd before anyone could stop. Eloria felt it too. For the briefest instant, something tightened in her chest. Then her pride crushed it. Fear was not something a royal should entertain, especially not in front of her court, her instructors, and the sanctuary supervisor. Her eyes remained calm. Her face remained composed. Only her gaze sharpened. She turned her head slowly, looking toward the trail of torn grass and pale soil where Michael had finally stopped. That movement! Someone whispered, voice strained. It was like dash. Silence. An instructor hissed, but it was too late. The shock had already settled into the field like frost. Eloria lifted her hand, fingers poised, and her voice cut cleanly through the stunned quiet. Tidevale, she said, tone flat. Stonebound. Both beasts responded instantly. The mist around the Tidevale tightened, drawing inward like a breath held. The stone-bound colossus shifted its weight, the ground compressing beneath its feet. Eloria's gaze did not leave Michael. Go, she ordered. The Tidevale's fins trembled. The stone-bound's plates clicked faintly. Then Spartan moved. His voice was calm. 3 against 3, Spartan said. The Tidevale hesitated. So did the stone-bound. Spartan's head tilted slightly, and his gaze settled on Eloria with a cold, steady certainty. You face our master, he continued. 1-on-1. His eyes shifted briefly, acknowledging the two beasts. We face your summons. They did not wait for the princess to react. Spartan and Ghost launched forward at the same time as the Tidevale and the stone-bound colossus surged to meet them. The four collided midair, force slamming into force, leaving the ground beneath them untouched and empty. For an instant, the sky itself seemed split, and Eloria was left alone on the ground. Her attention snapped back when a warning screamed at the back of her mind. She moved on instinct. Eloria twisted sharply to the side, robes flaring as she abandoned her position without hesitation. A heartbeat later, Michael tore through the space she had just occupied. He came in sideways, body completely out of control, a blur of momentum and violence. The air cracked as he passed, grass exploding upward in a thin line where his shoulder skimmed the ground. He did not touch her, but he passed close enough that the wind of it ripped at her hair. Michael slammed into the ground several meters beyond her, bounced once, then rolled hard, carving another rough scar into the field before skidding to a stop. Eloria straightened slowly, eyes narrowed now. Her heart was beating faster than she liked. Damn it! I thought I got the speed right this time. Though his tone made it clear he was complaining, Michael wore a wide smile on his face. Eloria barely had time to settle her footing before the warning came. Again, her pupils tightened. She moved. A sharp step, a half-turn, robes snapping as she slid away from the point her instincts screamed at. A breath later, Michael flashed past her like a misplaced comet. His body hit the ground wrong again, shoulder first, then hip, then back, tumbling so fast the gray grass blurred into streaks. The impact dug a fresh trench, and pale soil fanned outward in thin sprays. He rolled, bounced, rolled again. And this time he did not stop to complain. He twisted mid-roll, forced his hands under him, and used the momentum to throw himself upright even as his feet failed to catch properly. He staggered once, then vanished again. The space he left behind twitched. Eloria's warning flared. She dodged. Michael crashed through her previous position, tearing up grass and air in the same ugly line, then slammed down and skidded, his body scraping the ground like a thrown weapon. He was up again. Too fast. Not clean. Not controlled. But relentless. Again. The warning. The dodge. The ragdoll blur ripping through where she had been. Again. Eloria's breathing stayed quiet, but her movements sharpened into pure efficiency. She stopped trying to track him with her eyes. She trusted the warning and moved on the first pulse of it. Every step measured, every shift precise. And for several seconds, it became a strange pattern that made the watching elves forget to blink. A royal princess dodging desperately. A human launching himself like a broken arrow. Michael kept disappearing and reappearing, each burst ending with another violent tumble. Each tumble ending with him forcing himself back into motion before his body could protest. He hit the ground, rolled, sprang up. Hit the ground, rolled, sprang up. His clothes were already smeared with dirt. His palms were raw. His shoulders screamed, and his grin only widened. Because every time he vanished, the distance he crossed was tighter. Every time he reappeared, the angle was closer. Every time he ragdolled, the recovery was faster. Eloria felt it too. Michael Norman was adjusting. Michael was getting closer. Chapter 781 Monster 3. Michael vanished again. This time he did not overshoot. He reappeared at Eloria's side, feet skimming the ground, body aligned instead of collapsing into momentum. His shoulder dipped, his hips turned, and his fist drove forward in a tight arc. Eloria dodged on instinct. The punch missed her torso by a narrow margin and slammed into empty air. The result was immediate. A violent gust erupted outward, ripping through the gray grass and flattening it in a wide fan. The air cracked, sharp and concussive, and Eloria's body shook as the pressure struck her side. Her robes snapped violently as she was forced to slide back a full step, boots carving shallow grooves into the soil. Her eyes sharpened. Michael was already gone. He reappeared behind her and threw another punch, this one lower, aimed where her ribs would have been if she had not moved. She twisted away, letting the strike pass, and the fist smashed into the ground instead. The earth sank. Soil burst upward, grass disintegrated, and a shallow crater spread outward as a wave of wind tore past her legs. The shock rattled through her frame, forcing her to brace and shift her stance to keep her balance. Michael vanished and appeared again at her front. Eloria raised her forearm and met the attack halfway. It struck her guard like a hammer, driving her backward several meters. Her arms trembled as she absorbed the force, and her boots skidded across the ground before she managed to stop herself. Her breathing remained controlled. Her posture remained upright, but her body shook. Michael did not slow. He vanished and reappeared in rapid succession. Eloria dodged left. A fist ripped past her shoulder, close enough that the wind peeled strands of hair free and sent them snapping away. She ducked. Another punch screamed overhead and slammed into the ground behind her, the impact tearing a clean line through the grass and sending dust rolling across the field. She slid back, pivoted, and moved again as Michael reappeared at her flank. This time, she did not fully evade. The punch passed just short of her ribs, but the compressed air struck her side directly. Her body jolted, and she was forced to stagger 2 steps before regaining balance. Her expression tightened. Michael reappeared again, feet planted, fist already moving. High above the field, Selim hovered with his hands clasped behind his back. As a rank 4, following what happened on the ground was effortless. But Michael's movement made even Selim narrow his eyes. If Eloria's body had not been what it was, if her foundation had not been forged through ascension, if her physique had not belonged to a race like the elves with multiple advantages, her dodges would have failed already. A human from his world would not have had that luxury. Even a rank 3 human, one who stood above Michael in realm, would have died by now. Their body would have shattered before their mind could catch up. Beside the field, the sanctuary supervisor stood without moving, her gaze fixed on the space where Michael kept appearing and disappearing. Her expression remained composed, but her focus tightened more and more as the seconds passed. There was no confusion in her eyes now, only a hard, quiet shock. During his treatment, she had been unable to see through him, even At her level and with all her experience, she had known he was extraordinary, but this display went beyond that. Was this truly the performance of a freak of nature? From his earlier movements, it was obvious he could even go faster than this, but he did not seem used to operating at that level of speed. Yet, below, the instructors were no longer whispering. Most of them had stopped breathing properly without realizing it. Their eyes tried to follow Michael directly, failed, then began tracking the aftermath instead. Even then, many could only guess. Some of the younger elves looked like statues, mouths slightly open, brows furrowed in frustration. Their pride refused to accept what their eyes could not capture. A few had started using their magic instead of sight. That helped, but only a little. It did not make it less humiliating. They had mocked him earlier, called him a summoner hiding behind corpses. Now they watched the royal princess of their realm being driven backward by a human's fists. And most of them could not even see the fists. They only saw her shaking. They only saw her boots sliding. They only saw the ground ripping apart whenever Michael missed by a breath. One instructor clenched his jaw so hard his cheek trembled. Michael appeared again. His fist moved. Eloria did not dodge and awakened her law. She lifted her hand, fingers slightly spread, and the air around her changed. It was subtle at first. A scent rose, clean and sharp, like crushed leaves after rain. Green light threaded across her skin and robes. Thin vines pushed up through the gray ground. Eloria's presence swelled. Michael's fist stopped mid-swing as his body shifted backward in a blur, space twitching as he forced distance between them. He reappeared dozens of meters away, feet skidding, shoulders rising, and falling once. For the first time in the exchange, his grin faded. Eloria straightened slowly. Her eyes stayed on Michael. Her voice was calm. "Now," she said, "show me if that speed is all you have." Michael did not answer. His eyes narrowed as he reached deeper into the echo, past the speed amplifier, and touched something else that belonged to wisdom. Fold blink. The moment the skill settled into his body, the sensation was different from his earlier bursts. Michael vanished. Eloria's warning flared. She turned, palm raised, green threads already crawling over her fingers, and the air around her thickened with living intent. Michael appeared at her left. His fist moved. Eloria did not meet it. She folded away too. As a rank 3, just like any other supernatural at that level, she could use certain spatial abilities such as teleportation. Michael's use of space was more efficient, but thanks to her rank and how deeply she had gone into it, their teleportation was about equal in execution. Chapter 782 Conclusion. Refresh to clear error. Eloria's body blurred into a flash of green light. She reappeared several meters away, one knee bent, one hand already sweeping through the air. The ground answered. Vines snapped upward in a tight arc. Michael's fold blink triggered again. He was behind her. Eloria's intention shifted with him. The grass in that direction stiffened, blades rising like needles. A thin line of roots surged beneath the soil and burst out in a jagged curve, trying to catch his ankles as he arrived. Michael lifted his feet, barely clearing the grab, and struck. Eloria pivoted, forearm raised. The strike forced her to slide, but the vines around her legs tightened, anchoring her for an instant before snapping free. Michael disappeared again. Eloria followed and folded through space. She appeared near him and did not wait. Her hand snapped forward and the air thickened with pollen fine motes of green. A heartbeat later, a thorned vine lashed out from the ground in a straight line, fast enough to leave a whistle behind it. Michael fold blinked away. The vine struck empty air. Where it passed, the wind split, and the grass flattened in a clean groove as if something heavy had dragged across it. Michael appeared again. Eloria was already turning. A thin ring of vines erupted around her, low at first, then rising, spreading outward like a living net. Michael's fold blink triggered. He appeared at the edge of the ring and punched through the opening. Eloria slid back, one hand lifted. The vines tightened. The opening closed. Michael's fist passed through nothing but air, and the gust it produced tore a strip through the grass beyond her, dust rolling like a wave. He vanished again. Eloria folded again. They crossed the field in a series of silent flashes, leaving behind nothing but scars in the ground and brief blooms of green that withered as quickly as they formed. And as the exchanges piled up, Michael started to understand. Eloria's law was not just nature in a simple sense. It was territory. It was some sort of domain-type law. Michael adjusted and decided to be on the offensive in a different way and not rely on brute force again. Michael's eyes narrowed. Fold blink. He vanished and reappeared high above the grass, not near her body, but at the edge of her growing influence. His hands moved in quick, practiced motions, and mana poured out of him without hesitation. A sphere of fire formed first, dense and bright, then split into several smaller orbs that floated around his shoulders like miniature suns. Mana shield flared around him in a pale layer as he fell. Then he released the first spell. Acid Bomb. A green-black glob shot downward and burst the moment it touched the ground. The gray earth bubbled for an instant, and a sharp stench cut through the scent of leaves. Eloria did not move toward it. Vines surged up around the bubbling patch, thickening into a ring, and a layer of fresh growth spread over the damaged soil as if the land itself was trying to heal. Michael did not wait. Mana Arrow. A compressed bolt of pale mana screamed forward, aimed at the point where her vines were thickest. It struck and split the growth like a blade through wet rope, scattering shredded leaves and sap into the air. A second mana arrow followed immediately after, cutting along the same path with brutal precision, widening the opening and blasting apart what had begun to reform. Eloria lifted her hand. Green light flickered. The broken vines did not fall. They bent, twisted, and rejoined, nodding into a new shape that blocked the next mana arrow before it could reach her. Michael clicked his tongue silently. He hadn't really thought a lot of people with regenerative abilities, but it was certainly annoying. Fold blink. He appeared behind her. Eloria's warning flared again, and she folded away in a flash of green, reappearing with one knee bent and one palm already touching the ground. Roots burst outward in a short wave. Michael reappeared on the other side of the wave. His hands rose and the floating fire orbs shot forward at once, spiraling into the air and then slamming down around her in a pattern that forced her to move. The air heated. The grass blackened. Eloria's expression tightened for the first time since she awakened. Her law. She swept her hand outward. A surge of green erupted, and a curtain of thick leaves and vines rose. From the ground like a living wall, the fire orbs struck it and burst, flames licking across the surface, but the wall did not burn the way wood should. Charred, then regrew, then charred again, the cycle. Repeating. Michael poured more mana into the assault. Mana arrow after mana arrow. Acid bombs thrown at angles, forcing the growth to split and heal in multiple places at once. Eloria folded again, appearing to the side of the barrier, then lifted her hand. The ground around Michael responded. Grass hardened into sharp, pale spikes that rose in a tight ring around his feet, aiming for his ankles and calves. Fold blink. Michael vanished before the spikes completed their rise. He appeared above her shoulder and cast again. Acid bomb. Eloria's eyes flicked. Her body folded away. The bomb struck the grass and hissed, eating a shallow trench into the field. Eloria reappeared and immediately countered, her hand carving through the air as if she were pulling a thread. A vine launched upward like a spear, not toward Michael's current position, toward the place he was about to fold blink into. Michael's pupils tightened. Enough! A loud voice echoed, and suddenly Michael found that he could not move. A chill rose up his spine as he was about to turn to Selim for help, when he heard the princess say something that left him stunned. Father! After the princess spoke, suddenly Michael found out he was able to move again. Chapter 783 Return. Though the princess had spoken the word clearly, Michael did not see any new figure appear. The field remained exactly as it was. Then Eloria vanished. She was simply gone, her presence erased so completely that even the living territory she had woven into the field began to loosen and fade. The vines slowed, then sank back into the soil. The pressure that had weighed on the air lifted all at once, leaving the space strangely hollow. Michael's body unlocked in the same instant. The invisible restraint snapped away without warning, and he staggered half a step as control returned to him. His mana flared instinctively before he forced it down, eyes sweeping the field. Nothing. No new figure. Instead, a voice echoed. It did not come from any single direction. It was not loud, yet it carried across the entire field with effortless clarity. "The guest has received treatment and has awakened," the voice said calmly. "All exchanges and demonstrations are to cease with immediate effect." The instructors froze where they stood. Even the sanctuary supervisor straightened slightly, her gaze sharpening as she listened. "The elven realm extends its courtesy," the voice continued. "The guest is to be escorted back to his domain respectfully and without delay." Michael remained where he was, chest rising and falling once as he slowly lowered his hands. So that was it. The fight was over. Michael stood there for a moment, confused. The ending had come too fast. Just moments ago the exchange had finally shifted, pressure answering pressure, power clashing with power, and he had been adjusting in real time. It had been getting good. Too good to simply be. Cut off by a single sentence spoken from nowhere. His eyes swept the field again. The elves were already withdrawing. Some of the instructors turned away immediately, faces stiff. Others spared him quick, guarded glances as they left, looks that carried something between discomfort and reluctant acknowledgement. A few of the younger elves did not bother to hide it at all. Their gazes lingered on him with a mix of disbelief and unease, as if they were still trying to reconcile what they had just witnessed. Michael exhaled slowly. Before he could move, the space beside him distorted. Selim appeared first, stepping out of the air as if it had parted for him. The old man's posture was calm as ever, hands resting behind his back, but his eyes were sharp in a way Michael had not seen before. There was surprise there, unhidden and genuine. An instant later, the sanctuary supervisor appeared as well. Her expression was composed, but doubt lingered in her eyes, deep and thoughtful. They both looked at Michael at the same time. "Are you all right?" Selim asked immediately. The sanctuary supervisor spoke almost in the same breath. "Did you feel any instability? Pain in the soul? Pressure? Distortion?" Michael blinked, taken aback. He had expected words about the fight, about Eloria, about the voice. Instead, both of them were focused on him. "I'm fine," he said after a brief pause. The old woman's gaze sharpened as she studied him more closely. Selim nodded once. "You should not have been pushed into combat so soon after a soul injury," she said quietly. "Even if the treatment was successful." Michael let out a short breath, half a laugh. "I didn't feel like I was being pushed." An awkward silence followed. Selim was the first to break it. "Since he has spoken," he said calmly, "this is no longer a place for us to linger." His gaze shifted briefly toward the empty field, then back to Michael. "It would be best if we returned to Aurora immediately." Michael nodded. He wanted to ask why the match had ended so abruptly, who the man was that Eloria had called father, why a single voice had been enough to freeze him in place. But he swallowed the questions. This was not the right place for them. Even with Selim beside him, Michael knew better than to pry openly. Those were questions meant for privacy, and even then, he was not certain it would be appropriate to ask all of them. The sanctuary supervisor inclined her head slightly. "Before you depart, you should return to the sanctuary. Your summons are still there." Michael nodded again. "All right." The old woman turned first, space bending faintly around her as she prepared to depart. Selim followed a moment later, pausing just long enough to glance at Michael once more. "Come," he said. "We will talk once we are alone." That was enough. Michael exhaled quietly and stepped forward as the space around them folded, the ruined field vanishing behind them as they returned to the sanctuary. far from the ruined field, deep within the elven realm, a garden lay in perfect stillness. Pale stone paths curved gently between beds of glowing flowers that opened and closed with slow, breathing motions. Small creatures moved freely among the greenery. Feathered beasts no larger than cats perched on branches like ornaments, their eyes bright and curious. Translucent insects drifted through the air like living glass, leaving faint trails of light behind them. The atmosphere was calm, cultivated, and old. At the center of the garden stood a low pavilion of white wood and living vines. An elf sat there, relaxed, teacup resting lightly between long fingers. He was very handsome. Silver-green hair fell loosely over his shoulders, untouched by age. His face was refined but unadorned, calm to the point of seeming distant. He wore simple robes, free of insignia, yet the space around him felt settled, as if the garden itself acknowledged his presence. Across from him stood a young female elf, arms folded, expression tight. "Eloria, this was unnecessary," she said, irritation slipping through her composed tone. "You ended it without even asking me." The elf took a slow sip of his tea, unhurried. "Given time," she continued, her brows knitting, "there was a real possibility I would have one." He lowered the cup and looked at her, just quietly. For a moment he said nothing. Then a helpless smile tugged at his lips. "Listen to yourself," he said. Eloria stiffened. "You said possibility," he went on gently, "not certainty." His gaze stayed on her, steady and unyielding. "And this was someone in a lower realm than you." She opened her mouth, then stopped. "Even if you had one," he continued, "would it have been a victory you were proud of?" Silence fell between them. The garden creatures remained still, as if waiting. Eloria looked away. The elf leaned back slightly, tea resting untouched in his hand. "And, since it was only a possibility for you," he added, "then it was also a possibility for him." Her fingers tightened. "The human from Aurora," he said calmly, "could have one as well." Eloria's lips pressed together. She wanted to deny it, but the memory surfaced unbidden. The pressure, the speed. She fell quiet. After a moment, she spoke again. Slower now, confusion edging out frustration. "How," she asked, "could someone like that exist?" The elf smiled faintly, lifting his tea once more. "That," he said, "is exactly why the fight had to end. No one would think of his uniqueness immediately and use it to attack your reputation. I do not want that." Eloria stood there in silence, the weight of his words settling slowly. She understood now. It had not only been about the fight itself. It had been about pride, about face, about the weight carried by the name of the royal family. Ending the match when he did had spared more than just spectators' whispers. It had spared her from standing at the center of a comparison that would never fade. And yet the bitterness remained. Anyone who had eyes could see it. Even if she had one, even if she had forced Michael back in a spectacular clash, the truth would not change. She had stood in a higher realm, with a stronger foundation, a race blessed with countless advantages. And still, the outcome had never been certain. Which meant that, in some undeniable way, she had been inferior. The thought left an unpleasant taste in her mouth. Her father watched her quietly, tea forgotten in his hand. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, unhurried. "Do not crush yourself over this." Eloria's eyes flickered toward him. "You are the royal princess of the elven realm," he continued. "Your position, your standing, your future are not shaken by a single encounter." His gaze softened slightly. "That child may be special. A holy child, as his people would call it. Such a status grants him opportunities and recognition." He paused, then added, "But he will never replace you. He will never stand where you stand." Eloria clenched her fists at her sides. "What matters," her father went on, "is not that someone like him exists. It is that you do not allow yourself to be overtaken." His eyes met hers directly. "Use this as fuel. Grow stronger. Reach a point where such doubts do not even arise. If that youth doesn't die, you might find yourselves again on a grander stage in less than 2 years. Make your victory spectacular then. Only then, he finished silently, would their pride truly mean something. Eloria inhaled slowly. The bitterness did not vanish, but it settled, reshaped into something sharper. Resolve. She bowed her head once. Then her body blurred into a flash of green light, vanishing from the garden without another word. Her father remained seated, tea cooling in his hand, gaze resting on the space she had left behind. A few seconds later, he sighed as he turned to stare at a particular spot. Parenting is really hard, isn't it, dear? No one would imagine even a queen like you would run from it, haha. However, he laughed was cut short as a punch landed in stomach as a female laughter echoed at his sign of pain and helplessness on his face. In his heart, he decided that he would never let his sons marry someone more powerful than them. One could only imagine what could make a demigod think like this. /N. I did not want to make the progress feel dragged and leave many readers unsatisfied, so I made the 2 chapters a long one instead. Please vote to show support. Chapter 784 Delusional Maid. Meanwhile, as Michael in the original world collected his undead in preparation for leaving the Elven realm, Michael in the land of origin was facing something else. After checking his body condition a bit more, even inspecting his soul as well to see if there were truly hidden injuries, which took quite some time, Michael finally left the guest room. He was a little nervous because he wondered what he would say about his inactivity for 3 days that sounded justifiable. After finishing his inspection, Michael finally stepped out of the guest room. The door closed softly behind him. The hallway beyond was empty. The place felt too quiet, almost abandoned. He had already sensed it from inside the room. Still, that did not stop him from wondering. Was it that no one thought about him or anything? Didn't anyone come to check up on him or even keep eyes on him? Something about the silence felt deliberate. Michael began walking down the corridor, his footsteps light despite his size. His posture was relaxed, but his awareness remained spread outward, brushing gently against the space around him. There was nothing that stood out of the ordinary. Michael turned a corner and almost collided with someone who did not seem to be paying attention. A soft gasp sounded as a small figure stumbled backward. Michael reacted instantly. His body twisted out of the way before the impact could fully happen, but the sudden movement caused the other person to lose balance. She tripped, arms flailing, heels slipping on the smooth floor. Before she could fall, Michael caught her. One arm wrapped around her back, the other steadying her at the shoulder. The motion was clean and controlled, stopping her inches from the ground. For a brief moment, everything froze. The maid stared up at him. Her thoughts scattered. Up close, he looked unreal. Green eyes, clear and sharp, like polished gemstones. Pale skin that caught the light softly. Long hair falling loosely past his shoulders. A slender frame that did not look imposing at first glance, yet carried an undeniable sense of strength beneath it. Her heart skipped. This was exactly how the old stories went. A clumsy maid, a sudden fall, a mysterious noble who caught her before she hit the ground. Prince Charming. The thought slipped in before she could stop it, vivid and embarrassing all at once. She could almost hear the voices from childhood tales. The whispers about fate and chance meetings, about heroes wandering palace halls. Then he spoke. "Are you okay?" The spell shattered. Her face flushed red. She realized how close she was and how long she had been staring. No. I'm fine," she said quickly, straightening herself as Michael released her without hesitation. She bowed deeply, flustered. "I'm so sorry. I wasn't watching where I was going." Michael shook his head lightly. "It's fine. I wasn't paying attention either." She hesitated, then glanced around the empty hallway. She stole another glance at him, curiosity flickering through her embarrassment. "If you need anything, sir, I can help. Or I can find someone else for you." "I'm all right," he replied. Her shoulders relaxed slightly. "Then I wish you a safe journey." Michael gave a small nod in return and stepped past her, continuing. down the hall. She watched him go for a moment longer than she should have. Only after he disappeared around the corner did she let out a quiet breath, placing a hand over her chest to calm her racing heart. So the stories were lies, she thought. Or maybe they were just rare. The maid straightened fully, smoothing the front of her uniform as she took a steady breath. Her heart was still beating faster than it should have, embarrassment lingering like heat on her cheeks. Then her expression changed. Her eyes widened slightly as the realization hit her. That guest, the one the masters explicitly warned not to disturb under any circumstance. Her breath caught. "No way," she whispered. She turned sharply, eyes darting down the corridor in the direction he had gone. "Sir?" she called softly. No response. Her steps quickened as she moved forward, peering around the corner. The hallway beyond was empty, completely empty. No retreating footsteps, no fading presence, no sign that anyone had passed through at all. It was as if he had never been there. A chill ran down her spine. "I should tell the steward." Michael did not hear the maid's hurried footsteps or her panicked whisper. By the time the realization fully took hold in her mind, he was already gone. The visitors' quarters sat slightly to the side and a little back from the main structure of the Evermoon domain, deliberately separated so guests would not wander too freely. Ahead of him rose the main mansion. That was his target. The front of the mansion faced the main entrance of the domain, but Michael approached it from the side where open walkways and gardens connected the lesser halls to the central estate. He stepped into open air. A garden stretched between him and the mansion proper. Guards were stationed throughout the area, standing at intervals along the paths and near the entrances. Michael walked straight through. No one reacted. Their eyes did not track him. Their attention did not shift. Even as he passed within arm's reach of some of them, none showed the slightest sign of awareness. Michael was using his law. Or rather, he was using his law to copy the trait of his undead fade. This was something Michael had discovered during his fight with the princess. As long as he did not draw directly on the laws of his undead, his own law became remarkably sustainable. With his foundation and control, Michael realized he could maintain this state for as long as he wished, as long as he mainly remained stable. He crossed the garden at an even pace, and the mansion grew closer. Chapter 785 Familiar Face. Michael was not sneaking into the Duke's mansion because he had any special motive. He simply felt too lazy to deal with the guards and wanted to find Ariana directly. With her, he could easily understand what was going on or what had happened during the past few days while he was unconscious. Fortunately, it did not take long for Michael to find Ariana. He went straight to the place where she usually had her tea, the same place where she often entertained him or took him to rest after arriving at the mansion. Though Michael had only been here a few times, the place had left a bit of an impression on him. Michael stopped in front of a familiar door, the tea room. He raised his hand and knocked lightly. A brief pause followed. Then a female voice answered from within, clear and calm. "You may enter." Michael opened the door and stepped inside. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, falling across a low table neatly set with porcelain cups and a half-finished pot of tea. The scent of herbs lingered in the air, subtle and comforting. Seated at the table was a young lady in a simple dress. Her posture relaxed as she reached for her cup. The moment her eyes landed on him, she froze. Then her expression lit up. "Sir Mike Dash." The words slipped out instinctively, bright and unguarded. Almost immediately, she caught herself. Her shoulders stiffened, her gaze dipping as she cleared her throat and straightened in her seat, composure snapping back into place with practiced ease. Michael smiled. It was small and genuine. "Long time," he said lightly. She looked back up at him, a hint of embarrassment coloring her cheeks, but there was no hiding the relief in her eyes. She set the cup down carefully, her fingers lingering for just a moment before folding her hands in her lap. "You disappeared," she said more softly. "Everyone said you were experiencing something important. It was even the Great One who said we should not disturb you. But," she hesitated, then shook her head. I am just glad to see you standing. Michael stepped further into the room, closing the door behind him. The quiet settled again, comfortable rather than tense. Sorry about that, he replied. I will explain later. She studied him for a second, as if checking whether he was truly all right, then nodded once, accepting the answer without pressing further. Would you like some tea? She asked, rising to her feet. Michael glanced at the table, then back at her, the same easy smile still on his face. That would be nice. As she moved to pour another cup, the room returned to its familiar rhythm, as if his absence had only been a brief interruption rather than days of uncertainty. For the first time since waking, Michael felt like he was exactly where he needed to be. Michael accepted the cup when she handed it to him and took a slow sip. He paused. Then he blinked and took another sip. I knew it. I was never made to be this active. And why does tea taste so good here and not in the original world? The taste spread across his tongue. It was light, clean, and layered. There was no bitterness, no sharp aftertaste, only a smooth warmth that settled gently in his chest. Felt balanced. For a brief moment his thoughts drifted. He remembered the herbal teas his aunt used to make back home. Teas she swore were rare, special, and prepared with care. They always smelled pleasant, but the taste never quite matched the expectation. No matter how much honey she added, they still tasted like boiled leaves mixed into a strange concoction. Drinkable, but never something he looked forward to. This was different. This tasted like it had been made to be enjoyed. Michael did not hide his reaction. His eyes softened slightly as he looked down at the cup. Then he let out a quiet breath of satisfaction. Across from him, Ariana noticed immediately. When she saw the subtle curve of his lips and the way his shoulders eased, her own expression brightened. Is it good? She asked, trying to sound casual. Michael looked up at her and smiled. It's incredible, he said honestly. I don't think something like this should even exist. Ariana froze for half a second. Then she let out a small laugh, shaking her head. You're exaggerating, she said, though the way her eyes lingered on him betrayed her words. It's just tea. Michael took another sip, slower this time, as if proving a point. He set the cup down carefully and looked at her again. If this is just tea, he replied, then everything I've ever drunk before was a mistake. Her lips parted slightly. That's unfair, she muttered, turning her face away, but the faint blush creeping up her cheeks made it clear she was pleased. You always talk like that. I'm serious, Michael added, his tone calm and sincere. You have good taste. Really good taste. Ariana went still. For a brief moment, she forgot to hide it. The smile that spread across her face was soft, unguarded, and unmistakably happy. When she realized it, she cleared her throat and reached for her own cup, using the motion to compose herself. If you really want to appreciate me, she said after a moment, her voice lighter now, then you can bring me something next time. Michael raised an eyebrow. Oh, she glanced at him again, her eyes bright. Those chocolates from your hometown, the ones you brought before. Ever since I tasted them for the first time, I've wanted more. Michael laughed softly. Ariana coughed lightly, pretending to focus on her tea. I'm just saying, if you happen to remember. I'll remember, Michael replied without hesitation. Soon, that seemed to satisfy her. The room settled into a comfortable quiet as they drank. Sunlight shifted slowly across the floor, and the scent of tea lingered warmly in the air. For a moment, there was no urgency, no questions, no expectations. After a while, Michael finally spoke. Just now, Princess, you mentioned the Great One. Are you referring to the old king's sister? Chapter 786A Strange Feeling. Refresh to clear chapter error. /n. Posted my other novel recent chapter by mistake. So sorry, dear readers. Asterisk. After listening to Ariana recount everything, Michael could not help but wear an odd expression. From her words, he came to understand that the intense soul injuries and massive losses he had suffered in hell had not stayed isolated there. They had reflected directly onto his other body in the land of origin. That realization, while unsettling, made a certain kind of sense to him. If there was one thing his two bodies did not possess separately, it was his soul. The soul was not something that could be divided or duplicated. It was his true identity, unchanged no matter how many bodies he inhabited or how many worlds he existed in at once. Because of that, any damage to it would inevitably echo everywhere. This was also why the destruction of his undead in any world affected him across all his bodies, even if the effect was usually small. A thread was still there, no matter how thin. This time, however, the loss had been too great. The scale of destruction in hell had been massive enough to throw both of his bodies into shock at the same time. Returning to Ariana's explanation, she said they did not know exactly when it began. At some point during the night, strange energy fluctuations started leaking from Michael's room. When she and her father went to check after receiving no response from him, something she shyly apologized for, much to Michael's quiet amusement, they found him lying there without any visible injuries. On the surface, he looked fine. That was what made it frightening. His breathing was steady. His body showed no obvious wounds. Yet his energy was in complete disorder, spreading unevenly through the room as if it no longer obeyed any stable pattern. At that moment, it became obvious to them that something was seriously wrong. Ariana explained that her father had moved closer to inspect him, intending only to check his condition. The instant he crossed a certain distance, Michael's body reacted on its own. It entered a defensive state. If Duke Evermoon had not reacted quickly, retreating the moment he sensed danger, Michael might have left him gravely injured or worse. Of course, Ariana did not describe it so bluntly, but Michael understood what had happened. She then said the situation continued to worsen. The fluctuations around Michael grew so unstable that no one could approach him anymore. The pressure alone was enough to make most people retreat instinctively. And not everyone was Duke Evermoon. With no one else able to safely intervene, someone else was brought in to assess the situation. Or rather, someone arrived on her own after sensing the disturbance. As expected, it was the great princess, the old king's sister. Given Michael's power and the fact that this was the capital, it was not surprising. If his condition spiraled out of control, the consequences would not stay hidden for long. Either that, or the princess had already been keeping an eye on his location and immediately realized something was wrong. According to Ariana, the princess stated that Michael's soul was indeed damaged, severely so, yet at the same time she noted something unusual. He was benefiting from it. She admitted that she did not fully understand what was happening to him or why his soul was suffering such extreme damage. However, she could clearly see that Michael was also growing stronger through. Because of that, she instructed them not to disturb him. She said his outcome depended entirely on himself and on what the world had in store for him. Hearing this, Michael took a moment to imagine the scene. It seemed the princess had arrived at the exact point when he had begun comprehending his law, which explained why she could tell that he was becoming stronger despite the damage. After all, part of the reason he had managed to grasp his current law at all was because of that soul injury. It had forced him to perceive things he could never have understood otherwise. Pain had torn something open inside him, and through that opening he had finally seen what lay beyond. For a while, neither of them spoke. The tea had gone lukewarm. Sunlight still filtered through the tall windows, but the warmth felt thinner now. Ariana was the first to break the silence. "Sir Mike," she said softly. Michael looked up. She hesitated, fingers tightening around the porcelain cup in her hands before relaxing again. When she spoke, her voice was careful. "May I ask you something?" "Of course," Michael replied. She took a small breath. "Are you advancing toward the next stage?" The question caught him off guard. Michael blinked once, then leaned back slightly, studying her expression. "Why do you think that?" he asked. Ariana lowered her gaze briefly, then looked back at him. "I might be naive about many things," she said slowly, "but even I can tell when someone no longer fully belongs to their current stage." Michael stayed quiet. You were already at the peak, she continued. That much was clear long ago. But now, her voice softened. Now you are growing. Stronger without changing realms. She paused. That only happens when someone already has a step into the next rank. Michael exhaled. I do, he admitted. The words were calm, honest. Ariana stiffened for just a moment. Then she drew in a deep breath, steadying herself, and let it out slowly. When she smiled, it was restrained, careful, but not false. I thought so, she said quietly. I'm happy for you, Sir Mike. Truly. Michael felt something tighten in his chest. Her smile did not quite reach her eyes. I haven't fully reached it, he said after a moment. That step is there, but crossing it completely won't be easy. It could take a long time. Ariana nodded. But you're already standing at the door, she said. And given your age, you will cross it eventually. She looked at him again, the strained smile returning. Gentler this time. That's enough for me. Michael did not argue, but as he watched her lift her cup again, pretending to focus on the tea, he knew something had shifted between them. He just did not yet understand what it meant. The silence lingered longer than Michael expected. It was not uncomfortable in the usual sense. There was no tension, pressing down on the room, no hostility or unease. Yet something sat between them, quiet and heavy, like a thought neither of them was ready to voice. Michael was the one who broke it. By the way, he said casually, lifting his cup again though he did not drink from it this time, is there any news about the ruins? Ariana looked up, surprised for a fraction of a second. The ruins? She echoed. Yes, Michael continued. The expedition the kingdom was organizing. I've been unconscious for a few days. There's no way I'd know if anything changed. Her shoulders relaxed slightly, as if grateful for the shift in topic. Oh, she said, nodding. That. She placed her cup down gently. The team has already been finalized, Ariana said, just as planned. Before. Your name is still on the list, Sir Mike. Michael nodded. That was expected. The only new development, she continued, is that the departure has been confirmed. In about a week, maybe 2 at most, the expedition will move out. With other kingdoms, she added after a brief pause. Understanding settled in immediately, so it had reached that stage. The ruins were important enough that cooperation was unavoidable, or dangerous enough that no single kingdom wanted to shoulder the risk of greed. Either way, it meant complications, politics, and eyes watching from every direction. Michael opened his mouth to respond. Before he could speak, Ariana stood up abruptly. I'm sorry, she said quickly. Please excuse me for a moment. Her movement was stiff, awkward in a way that did not match her usual composure. My stomach feels a little unsettled, she added, offering a polite smile. That appeared just a second too late. Michael paused. He knew immediately it was a lie. With her strength and constitution, a cup of tea was not enough to upset her body, not even slightly. Even if it had been poisoned, she would have noticed long before now. But he did not call her out. Instead, he rose halfway from his seat, concern softening his voice. Are you sure you're all right? Ariana froze for a brief moment. Then she nodded quickly. I'm fine, she said. Really? She did not meet his eyes as she turned away. We'll talk later, Sir Mike, she added, already moving toward the door. Michael watched her back as she left the room, the door closing softly behind her. The tea room felt quieter after that. Not empty, just hollow. Michael remained standing for a moment before slowly sitting back down. He stared at the cup in front of him, the surface of the tea, barely rippling. Something was wrong. He could feel it. Chapter 787 Realization. There were many things Michael could be ignorant about. That did not mean he was naive. As Ariana left, only then did he begin to think. At first, he considered the simplest explanation. Concern. Worry. The kind that came naturally when someone who was somewhat of a friend to you fell into trouble without warning. That much was reasonable. But the longer he sat with it, the more another conclusion formed. It was not only concern. Ariana was reacting to his growth. In the Awakener system, she was not even rank 2 yet, only just below it. That was not an insult. At her age and background, her progress was already considered impressive. In any other circumstance, the difference between them would have been negligible. It would have been fine if Michael himself were an ordinary rank 2. But he was not. Even before stepping into rank 3, he had already been dealing with matters that belonged to that stage. And now, with a law seed awakened, entering that realm was no longer a distant possibility. It was a matter of time. With his foundation, even if Ariana advanced to rank 2, the gap between them would not close. If anything, it would widen, especially when he ascended to rank 3. And rank 3 was already considered the peak of power within her kingdom. What would happen when he stood there fully? Michael understood then. It was not jealousy. It was not resentment. It was distance. Michael leaned back in his chair, eyes unfocused as his thoughts drifted further. The comparison came to him naturally. Felt like school. Not the early years when everyone was still figuring things out, when grades rose and fell unpredictably and the future felt distant enough to ignore. It was like the final year of high school, that strange period when some people were still worrying about exams while others had already received admission letters, or in college, job offers or clear paths forward. Ariana was still there, still preparing, still building. Rank 2 was her next step, just like graduation was the next step for most students. Important, significant, a milestone worth celebrating. Michael, on the other hand, felt like someone who had already left campus. Not officially, perhaps. His name might still be on the roster, but his mind was already elsewhere, dealing with problems that no longer fit within the syllabus. While others worried about passing exams, he was thinking about rent, survival, responsibility, and consequences that could not be solved by studying harder. That was the difference. From the outside, both were still equal in class and status. But anyone paying attention could tell they were no longer walking the same road. Conversations had changed. Priorities had shifted. Time itself felt different. You could not blame someone for feeling left behind when the person beside them suddenly started moving faster. Michael realized that was what Ariana was facing. She was not weak. She was not slow. She was simply progressing at the speed the world and her talent had set for her. Meanwhile, though Michael was no different in that he was also moving at a certain pace, it was undeniably faster. One must not forget that Michael had reached his current state in 6 months. Even for some Awakeners, this could take years. When two people start at the same place, they can walk together for a long time. But once one of them crosses a line the other has not even reached yet, walking side by side becomes impossible. At best, they walk parallel paths. At worst, one can only watch the other disappear into the distance. That distance was what Ariana had felt. Michael exhaled quietly. There was a cruelty to growth that no one talked about. People praised strength, praised advancement, praised rising higher and faster than others. But they rarely mentioned what was left behind in the process. The conversations that no longer fit. The silences that grew heavier. The relationships that changed without anyone ever meaning for them to. He looked down at the tea again. Michael did not regret it. He could not. Distance did not require ill intent to exist. Sometimes it was simply the result of one person stepping into a future the other was not ready to face yet. Michael lifted the cup and took another sip, the warmth grounding him. Whatever this change meant, he would face it when the time came. The thought did not end there. As Michael sat in the quiet tea room, that sense of distance tugged at something deeper, something far older than his connection to Ariana, Aurora. His aunt's small kitchen in Woodstone City came to him first. The cramped space, always faintly smelling of spices and cleaning soap. His cousin sprawled on the couch, half listening to whatever nonsense was playing on the screen while pretending to study. Ordinary scenes. Mundane. Safe. And yet, when he thought about them now, there was distance there, too. It was the same kind of gap. Michael had been moving forward at a pace none of them could see. Even when he was with them, even when he smiled and spoke normally, part of him was already elsewhere, thinking about threats they could not perceive, preparing for futures they would never have imagined, carrying burdens he could not explain without sounding insane. Lily was still in school. Aunt Mia was still worrying about bills, schedules, small arguments, plans that stretched only a few years ahead. Meanwhile, Michael was already thinking in decades, in lifespans. That realization tightened something in his chest. He had told himself more than once that this was necessary, that this was simply how things had to be, that he could not stop or slow down just to remain familiar. But that did not mean he was willing to leave them behind. Michael straightened slowly, his earlier lethargy fading as something firmer took its place. Resolve. He had power now, power that would only continue to grow. And with it came responsibility not just to himself but to the people he cared about. Chapter 788 Resolve. End of Volume 3. When he returned to Aurora, he would not allow that distance to widen further. He would evolve them, his aunt, his cousin. If they remained ordinary while he continued forward, time itself would become an enemy. One day he would look back and realize they had grown old while he had not. He would not accept that. With evolution, they would live longer, far longer. They would gain the ability to cultivate, to at least stand on the same road, even if they walked it at a different pace. They would have the choice to stay with him, to see where this journey led, instead of being forced to stop at the edge. Michael knew the risks. Once someone stepped onto this path, there was no true return to ignorance. The world became larger, harsher, and far less forgiving. But he also knew this was a journey he could no longer abandon. If he was going to walk it, then he would love to not walk it alone. Michael closed his eyes briefly, then opened them again, calm restored but sharper than before. He would handle Ariana's distance when the time came. For now, his advancement quest was what was most important. Michael's gaze sharpened. With a thought, the familiar translucent panel unfolded before his eyes, hovering quietly in the air as if it had always been there, waiting. Rank Advancement Mission. Rank 2, Rank 3. His eyes moved over the requirements without haste. The first condition was already clear. Comprehend a law. Progress, 62%. Michael exhaled slowly. That number alone would have stunned most Awakeners. Law comprehension was not something measured in percentages for the majority. People either brushed against it by accident or spent decades circling its edges without ever grasping its core. 62% meant he had already crossed the most painful threshold. The law was no longer foreign to him. It was taking shape inside his soul, aligning itself with his existence. The remaining 38% was not trivial, but it was no longer uncertain. It was a matter of refinement, of depth, of time spent understanding until the universe fully acknowledged him and his understanding of its truth. The second condition followed. Possess 5 Rank 3 Undead. Michael's expression did not change. Even after the catastrophe in Hell, after losing more than 100 undead in a single stretch of devastation, this requirement was almost laughable. He still had enough resources and suitable foundations to fulfill it several times over if he wished. The losses had been heavy, yes, but he did not believe they had crippled him. 2 tasks standing like walls. Complete them and advance. But Michael was not satisfied with that. His eyes lingered on the panel, not on what it demanded, but on what it did not. Bare minimum advancement was safe, predictable, stable, and mediocre. Michael had already learned what happened when he exceeded the system's expectations. The last time he broke past the baseline, the rewards had not merely been better. They had been transformative. His foundation had thickened. His growth rate had accelerated. His future potential had widened in ways no standard advancement could compare to. That was what he wanted again. No, that was what he required. If I'm going to advance, Michael murmured quietly, then I'm not. Stopping at the line. 5 Rank 3 Undead was the requirement. That did not mean 5 was the limit. If he pushed further, and if he could force a limit break in the advancement mission itself, his thoughts quickened. A limit break Rank 3 advancement would not merely place him at the early stage of the rank. With the right preparation, with enough excess power and law integration, he could step directly into the advanced stages of rank 3 the moment he ascended. That was the goal. Michael had no intention of stopping at its doorstep. He dismissed the panel with a flicker of intent, the light fading as his resolve settled into place. However, there was something else, something that bothered him. Michael looked at the empty air in front of him and spoke calmly, without hesitation. "Origin will," he said. "Are you there?" The tea room remained silent. No response. Not even the faint disturbance he sometimes felt when that presence acknowledged him indirectly. Michael did not frown. He had not truly expected an answer. In his mind, the decision had already been made. The title the Origin will had granted him was not a blessing in the simple sense. It was also a restraint, a limiter placed deliberately on his growth. While others could surge forward rapidly through experience points, stacking gains recklessly, Michael could not. This made Michael believe that the order of his rank advancement tasks mattered. If Michael completed the law comprehension first and the Origin will acknowledged it before his second task was finished, then the system would lock his advancement parameters around that state. Any attempt to exceed the baseline afterward would be restricted. That would be his loss. So he would not allow it. He would finish the second condition first, far beyond what was required. Only then would he allow the law to reach completion. Michael spoke again, his voice quieter this time. "I wish for my advancement to proceed smoothly." Again there was no response. Yet this time he felt it. Not sound. Not movement. A gaze. It brushed against him briefly, distant and vast, as if something immeasurable had turned its attention toward him for the span of a single breath. Michael searched for it out of instinct, and like always, found nothing. The presence withdrew as silently as it had come. Michael let out a slow breath and did not pursue it further. That was enough. There were many things he did not know about the Origin will. Many rules he had yet to fully understand. But ignorance did not mean helplessness. "I want to know, I need to get stronger." Chapter 789 Debt. Back in the Elven realm, Michael was already done collecting all his undead into the damaged coffin of the Forgotten. Due to the Sanctuary Supervisor and Selim, the old rank 4 from Aurora, not leaving him alone, Michael had no choice but to reveal the coffin in the eyes of others. Fortunately, though this was an epic-grade treasure, its appearance and the feeling it gave did not do that rank justice. This was the only reason Michael dared to bring it out in the first place while being so close to 2 strong people who were probably more than 10 times his age. Fortunately, the situation turned out as expected. Aside from the large space the coffin contained, which the 2 rank 4s were able to observe from how Michael collected all his undead without issue, they did not pay more attention to it. After collecting his last undead, the Sanctuary Supervisor, who had been a bit quiet since Michael's battle with the Elven Princess, finally spoke. The Sanctuary Supervisor turned her gaze from Michael to Selim, her expression composed but her eyes sharp with intent. "I trust our agreement still stands," she said calmly. "I hope you do not intend to turn away from it now." Selim's face darkened almost imperceptibly. To anyone else he looked unchanged. Only those who had known him for a long time would have noticed the tension tightening beneath his stillness. In his mind, numbers flashed one after another. The down payment alone for stabilizing Michael's soul injury had already torn a visible hole through his personal reserves. If it were not for one thing, he would have already lost his temper. The Federation. Selim was certain they would compensate him fully, not just for the treatment itself, but for everything he had done since Michael appeared in their sight, including his involvement in Hell, including the role he had played in helping bring down a demon lord. Those merits were not small. They were the kind that could not be ignored, no matter how bureaucratic the upper layers of the Federation pretended to be. If that reimbursement did not come, he would have truly crashed out. Outwardly, however, Selim's face remained expressionless. He gave the supervisor a slow, measured nod. "You don't need to worry," he said evenly. "We will get back to you on that matter." The Sanctuary Supervisor studied him for a moment longer, then inclined her head slightly, accepting the answer at face value. Nearby, Michael remained silent. He understood exactly what they were talking about. Not every detail, but enough. So he did the sensible thing. He pretended not to understand at all. It was a little shameless. But it was also necessary. Michael did not have finances to speak of. If this quiet act of ignorance saved his non-existent wallet from imploding, then he was more than willing to accept the shame. The sanctuary supervisor finally turned her attention back to him. Her gaze lingered for a brief moment, thoughtful, before she spoke. Again. About the garden, you're undead. Give me 100 years. Michael did not even wait for her to finish speaking before he spoke, as he felt a slight headache coming on. Thanks to Lily's actions, Michael found himself in a huge debt upon waking up. It was such a massive debt that even after he spoke, Selim beside him acted as though he had not heard anything. The cost was that big even to someone at rank 4. If it were not for the fact that he was partly sure Lily would wake up a step closer to rank 4 or enter rank 4 immediately, Michael would have crashed out the moment the sanctuary supervisor mentioned his debt. Thinking of how beginning also had to eat something before he could ascend, Michael could not help but believe that his undead titans were truly troublesome. One did not simply have them without falling into debt. The sanctuary supervisor shook her head slowly, an amused smile touching her lips as she looked at Michael. Are you even aware, she said lightly, of how much you would need to pay to cover the losses your undead caused? Her tone was calm, almost teasing, but the meaning behind it was anything but light. Even I, she continued, her gaze steady, at a rank higher than yours, would not dare say I could settle something like that in less than 100 years. Michael's expression darkened at once. 100 years was already an absurd figure. 200 was the number that surfaced in his mind almost immediately. He opened his mouth, reluctant, already preparing to say it. Before he could, the female elf let out a soft sigh. 100 years it is, she said, waving a hand as if finalizing a trivial matter. If I do not get it by then, I will personally come find you. We can discuss it again. Her eyes lingered on him as she spoke, sharper now, more curious than stern. For a brief moment, a strange thought crossed her mind. How strong would he be in 100 years? Surely he would have reached her stage by then, or perhaps even surpassed it. The thought made her pause. She shook her head almost immediately, as if dismissing something inappropriate. It felt strange to look forward to the success of someone from another race. Stranger still to feel a faint sense of expectation about it. Michael said nothing. He simply nodded gratefully. 100 years. To Michael, it sounded vast. Part of it was instinct. Even now, even with the power he held, his lived experience was still short. Measured against the span of time he had actually spent breathing, struggling, and surviving, a century felt enormous. It was difficult not to see it that way, but he also knew that perspective was deceptive. To other supernaturals, 100 years was not a lifetime. It was a long stretch, yes, but not an unthinkable one. Many could spend half of it in seclusion, meditation, or sleep, emerging only slightly older. Time bent differently once one stepped beyond mortality. Chapter 790, Taking Action. Edited. Michael could not blame himself for thinking otherwise. Even if his growth slowed from this point onward, he did not believe that in 100 years he would become ordinary. That thought had never once crossed his mind. Who could say what he would possess by then, what methods he would master, what compensation he could offer at that level? He was confident in that much. The sanctuary supervisor let out a quiet breath and straightened. The matter clearly settled in her mind. That will be all for today, she said. It is time for you to depart. Selim nodded once. He stepped closer and placed a firm hand on Michael's shoulder. Michael did not resist. This was an action he was already familiar with. Whenever someone far stronger than him wanted to relocate him instantly, this was usually how it began. A hand on the shoulder. A brief sense of spatial distortion. Then the world would blur and reform somewhere else. At least that was how it was supposed to go. Almost immediately, Michael's eyes widened. He stared at Selim in pure shock, his pupils tightening as something far heavier than simple teleportation pressure washed through him. There was no time to react. The sensation slammed into him all at once. Then everything went dark. Michael's body went slack, consciousness severed cleanly. Even the sanctuary supervisor blinked in surprise. Her gaze flicked from Michael's unconscious form to Selim's impassive face, her brows lifting slightly. She studied him for a brief moment, clearly considering whether to ask. Selim did not look inclined to explain. In the end, she did not press him. After all, she did not believe that after spending such an absurd amount of resources on the boy, the old man would suddenly decide to harm him. That would make no sense. Not politically, not personally, not financially. Still, she spoke, her tone carrying quiet authority. "Nothing unnecessary is to be done to him," she said calmly. "He still owes me far too much." She paused, then added pointedly, "Unless you intend to pay that debt yourself." For the first time, Selim's grip softened. "Only slightly." "I understand," Selim replied. That was all he said. He gave a short nod and turned his attention forward, his posture settling as if the matter were already concluded. "We are ready to leave." The sanctuary supervisor watched them for another moment, her expression unreadable. Then she stepped back, allowing the space around them to distort as Selim's power took hold. As the light twisted and folded inward, her gaze lingered on Michael's unconscious face. 100 years, she thought. She shook her head faintly. By then, what kind of existence would he be? The question remained unanswered as space collapsed, and the two figures vanished from her sight. Selim reappeared beside a familiar post, the transition completed in silence. A moment later, the oppressive atmosphere of hell pressed in from all sides within the elven forest territory of the 15th floor. Michael floated unconscious at his side, suspended by Selim's power, his expression slack and pale. Selim frowned. To be honest, he had not wanted to do it. This had never been part of the clean version of the plan. Originally, Michael was supposed to remain unconscious far longer. Long enough for matters to settle. Long enough for the Academy forces lurking outside the elven territory on the 15th floor to leave. By the time Selim exited with him, he could have slipped away quietly, given Michael a reason that sounded reasonable enough, and avoided unnecessary complications. Instead, Michael had woken up early. Not only that, he had fought the royal princess of the elven realm. That single act had dragged everything forward. Their exit had been forced far sooner than Selim preferred. At this point, the academy Michael came from was almost certainly waiting beyond the elven territory, positioned just outside the boundaries of the 15th floor. Selim could already imagine it. Selim's jaw tightened. He had no intention of handing over a holy child to an organization like the Academies, not to one that even the Federation could not fully control. He would not allow that. Selim glanced at Michael again, studying the boy's unconscious form as he drifted beside him. "You really don't make things easy," he muttered quietly. The decision to knock him out had not been made lightly, but it had been necessary. Michael did not look easy to fool. If Selim had tried to move him while he was fully conscious, explanations would have been required. Delays would have followed. And delays right now were unacceptable. Better to deal with the consequences later. Selim did not linger. The moment he left the elven territory behind, he accelerated, his figure blurring as he pushed straight toward the exit of the 15th floor of hell. He was moving fast. He had just reached the final stretch when a voice spoke calmly. Behind him. "Now that's interesting." Selim froze. He stopped completely. The air around him seemed to tighten as he turned slowly, power coiling instinctively beneath his skin. His eyes locked onto the figure standing several dozen meters away as if he had always been there. The man was smiling. It was an easy smile, relaxed and almost amused, completely out of place in hell. If Michael had been awake, he would have recognized him instantly. Director Arvin. The strangest man in the academy. The kind of person no one could ever quite read, no matter how long they watched him. His clothes were unremarkable, his posture casual, his hands tucked loosely into his pockets as if he were taking a stroll. Right now, Arvin's gaze was fixed squarely on Selim. "Where?" Arvin asked lightly, tilting his head. "Are you rushing off to?" "With Academy property." Selim's eyes narrowed. The unconscious Michael floated beside him, suspended in midair, completely defenseless. Selim shifted subtly, placing himself half a step closer, his presence shielding the boy. "I did not sense your arrival," Selim said evenly. Arvin chuckled softly. "That's because I didn't arrive just now." He took a step forward, boots crunching lightly against scorched ground. "I've been here for a while, watching, waiting." "So," Arvin continued, his smile widening just a little, "you wouldn't mind explaining why a student under Academy protection is being carried unconscious?" Chapter 791. Arvin. Selim's gaze hardened. "Who are you?" he asked. For a split second, Arvin looked genuinely stunned. Then he burst into laughter. It was loud and unrestrained, echoing strangely through the surrounding area. Arvin bent slightly at the waist, one hand resting on his knee as he laughed, shoulders shaking. "Ah, that's on me," he said at last, straightening with a broad grin. "That's entirely my fault." He gave a small apologetic nod, the gesture casual but oddly sincere. "My manners slipped. I should have introduced myself earlier." Arvin placed a hand lightly over his chest. "Director Arvin," he said, "Advanced Counselor of Verant's Edge, one of the 10 Awakener academies in Aurora. Also the academy your student over their studies at." The moment the words left his mouth, Selim's body tensed. A man of his level, especially one who worked directly under the Federation, naturally knew of the 10 Awakener academies. Even if the details were fragmented, even if he had never dealt with them directly, the names alone carried weight. They were pillars, independent forces that existed alongside the Federation rather than completely beneath it. Verant's Edge was one of them, and Arvin. Selim's eyes narrowed slightly. This was the first time he had ever seen the man in person, but the name was no stranger to him. Far from it. Among high-level circles in Aurora, Director Arvin was spoken of rarely, and always with caution. One of the individuals closest to the demigod rank. Also, one of the few beings still alive from the era when mana first descended upon Aurora, when the apocalypse tore the world apart. A survivor from the beginning. That realization settled heavily in Selim's chest. However, this was not what gave Selim the biggest headache. Everyone in hell was suppressed, and as long as they were above a certain stage, they were brought down to that level. Though Arvin was stronger than Selim under normal circumstances, it remained uncertain who would actually end up with the last laugh under such conditions. But even that was not the real problem. What gave Selim an almost splitting headache was Arvin's personality. Arvin was a madman, not in the sense of reckless bravado, but an actual madman. Before the apocalypse, Arvin had been confined to a mental institution and diagnosed with several disorders, including split personality among others. Selim did not know the full story, but it seemed the root of Arvin's instability was tied to his profession as a teacher at the time. According to fragmented records and old reports, Arvin had survived a fire incident where he was forced to watch his students, including his own daughter who had been one of them, burned to death. What no one had expected was for a madman to survive for so long, let alone rise to become one of the most powerful individuals in Aurora 300 years later. Arvin, for his part, seemed delighted by the act of introducing himself. His smile softened into something almost playful as his gaze flicked briefly to the unconscious Michael floating nearby. "Well now," he said lightly. "This is awkward, isn't it?" He looked back at Selim, eyes bright with interest. "I assume you can see why I'd be curious," Arvin continued. "A student under Academy protection, unconscious, being hurried out of hell by a Federation powerhouse." His tone remained friendly, but the air around him felt subtly different now, like a stage had been set. "So," Arvin said, spreading his hands slightly, "how about we talk this through?" Selim did not answer immediately. His gaze remained fixed on Arvin, mind moving quickly. Excuses were easy to give. Convincing this man was another matter entirely. Michael is required to give an account of the hell incident, Selim said at last, his voice even. There are matters related to the Demon Lord's fall, and several other details that fall under Federation jurisdiction. Some of them are not things I am permitted to disclose to external organizations. He paused briefly, then added, Time is sensitive. That is why I am moving quickly. Arvin listened without interrupting, his smile never quite fading. When Selim finished, Arvin nodded slowly, as if genuinely considering the explanation. I see, he said. A debriefing. His eyes drifted once more to Michael's unconscious form, hovering quietly between them. Then I have a simple question, Arvin continued, tilting his head. Why is he unconscious? Selim's expression did not change. He exhausted himself, Selim replied calmly. I made the decision to stabilize him and prevent further damage after his treatment. Arvin hummed softly. Interesting, he said. Very considerate of you. Authority is a flexible thing, Arvin continued mildly. Whatever information the Federation seeks can be discussed through proper channels. Varant's Edge is not ignorant of what transpired in Hell, and Michael remains, first and foremost, a student under Academy jurisdiction. Selim's jaw tightened. He cannot remain with the Academy right now, Selim said. There are discussions that require privacy. Decisions that will affect more than one faction. This is not something I am at liberty to share. Arvin's smile did not fade, but something behind his eyes sharpened. And yet, he said, you are attempting to remove him without consultation. No notice. That does not really put me at ease. He took another step closer, stopping just outside the subtle pressure field Selim had unconsciously spread around Michael. His gaze sharpened, though his smile remained relaxed. Selim's tone cooled. You are overstepping. Arvin chuckled. Perhaps. He shrugged. But that is part of my job. His gaze flicked back to Michael, lingering for a moment longer than before. Michael is under Academy protection, Arvin said, his voice still mild. That protection does not vanish simply because the Federation wishes to ask questions. If he is to be questioned, it will be done with oversight. Selim felt pressure build subtly around them. Are you trying to take him from me? He asked. Arvin shook his head. No, he said. He smiled again, but this time there was something sharper beneath. I am simply asking you to wake him. Chapter 792 Arvin's edited. Silence stretched between them. The air of hell seemed to grow heavier. Selim did not move. That will not be happening, he said flatly. Arvin's eyes gleamed. Oh, he said softly. Then I suppose we have reached the interesting part of this conversation. Selim moved first. There was no warning. The moment Arvin's words fell, the air itself collapsed inward. Invisible pressure surged forward like a tidal wave, space compressing and folding under Selim's will. Layers of compressed force stacked atop one another, converging on Arvin's position from every direction. To use his law, this openly meant only one thing. Selim was going all out. Arvin's smile did not vanish. Instead, his body split. The space he occupied fractured, and in the span of a heartbeat, 5 figures stood where one had been. One was the original Arvin, still smiling, though the madness in his eyes dulled slightly, replaced by an unsettling calm. The other 4 were wrong. Each carried the same face, the same presence, yet their auras were wildly different. One looked vacant, eyes unfocused, as if barely aware of the world. One radiated cold detachment. One trembled faintly, lips twitching. And the last looked insane. That Arvin grinned wide, teeth bared, eyes burning with manic delight as chaos rippled around him. His aura surged violently, unstable and wild, clashing against the compressed air bearing down on them. Flames erupted. The fire Arvin raised was erratic and feral, twisting against Selim's air pressure, burning without pattern or restraint. Where the compressed atmosphere should have crushed everything flat, The flames tore through it instead, dispersing the attack in violent bursts of heat and distortion. The clash detonated outward. Selim's face tightened. He remembered now. More details surfaced from the fragments he had once dismissed as rumors. Director Arvin's law was said to be tied to the greater law of chaos, one that allowed his split personalities to manifest physically, each drawing upon a different aspect of his power. Each personality wielded something different. The one standing against him now, the Mad One, was the embodiment of destruction. Fire. Selim reinforced his stance, air condensing around Michael protectively as he absorbed the backlash. His gaze flicked across the remaining Arvins, noting how the others simply observed, unmoving, as if this battle did not concern them at all. The original Arvin watched with quiet interest. The Mad Arvin laughed. Selim exhaled slowly, eyes cold. The laughter had not even finished echoing when the others moved. The trembling Arvin stepped forward. His shoulders were hunched, arms drawn slightly inward as if bracing against something only he could feel. His eyes darted once toward Selim, then immediately away, filled with a raw, instinctive fear that felt almost contagious. The temperature dropped. Frost spread across the air. Pale mist rolled outward, carrying a biting chill that sank far deeper than the skin. But it was not the clean, cutting cold of simple elemental force. The moment the frost expanded, Selim felt it. A subtle tightening in his chest. A faint hesitation, uninvited and unwelcome, tugging at the edges of his thoughts. The fear radiating from that Arvin did not merely exist. It bled outward, seeping into the environment itself. Emotion given form. For a moment, Selim felt like killing himself. Selim's eyes sharpened instantly. His will flared, air roaring around him as he crushed the creeping sensation before it could take root. The pressure field around Michael thickened in response, shielding him not only from the cold, but from the emotional influence threaded through it. The trembling Arvin flinched as the resistance hit him, frost cracking beneath his feet. I don't like this, he muttered, voice barely audible. The ice wavered, but did not fade. At the same time, the vacant Arvin lifted his head. His expression remained blank, eyes dull and unfocused, as if nothing in front of him truly existed. He raised one hand slowly, fingers loose, and careless. The space in front of him thinned. The air itself seemed to lose substance, becoming hollow and weak, as though reality had been scraped away and left fragile in its place. A narrow corridor of emptiness formed. Everything caught within it was pulled forward, and launched ahead in a silent surge. There was no explosion, no roar, only sudden acceleration as matter was dragged along the line of least resistance, straight toward Selim. Selim twisted his wrist, air condensing into dense barriers that slammed shut across the corridor, but the precision of the attack still drew a thin line between his brows. The cold Arvin moved next. The surrounding air stilled. Motion itself seemed to still. The heat from the flames dulled. The drifting frost slowed. Even the chaotic Arvin's fire flickered. Selim felt his own air lull resist instinctively, layers of pressure grinding against an opposing stillness that sought to flatten everything into quiet compliance. For manifestations, for expressions of the same fractured will. The original Arvin finally spoke, voice calm, almost gentle. "Careful now," he said mildly. "If all of you pull at once, you'll hurt the boy." The Mad Arvin ignored him, flames roaring higher as he lunged again, laughter spilling freely from his throat. Selim drew a slow breath. He was starting to regret coming to hell at all. At least if he wasn't around, there'd be no sense of responsibility, and what was happening now would be another man's problem. Unfortunately, he just happened to be available. Selim thrust his hand forward, aiming at the space between them. The compressed pressure detonated outward in a wide, indiscriminate burst, a collapsing dome of force meant to disrupt everything. Before any of the Arvins could fully adjust, Selim moved. Space warped around him as he seized Michael more tightly, the pressure field locking into a single direction. Retreat. He vanished in a violent surge, air folding inward as his figure blurred toward the far edge of the floor. The battlefield fell silent. The original Arven watched the empty space, smile slowly widening. Chapter 793 taken by surprise. Edited. Refreshed to clear error. Michael had a lot to say about his first kidnapping experience. However, it was so much that he could only express it in a few words. The first was that you really do not know how mad people can be up there when they look so normal up close. Another was why in the heavens was he being kidnapped? Yes. At some point during the confrontation between Arven and Selim, where he was carried around like some form of goods, Michael had woken up from whatever technique Selim had cast on him. Selim would never have expected that Michael's sensitivity to danger and energy was so high that it could knock him out of unconsciousness. The issue now was that Michael could not let Selim become aware that he was awake, lest he be put back to sleep. But he also could not wait long enough for Selim to return to the real world. At least in hell, Michael had some sort of advantage. The moment they returned to Aurora, no matter what advantage the current Michael had, in terms of raw power, he would not be able to do anything if Selim wanted to act against him. All this meant only one thing. He needed to find an opportunity to escape. As for Arven, Michael did not really trust the director. Even back at the academy, he only felt safe around him because they were within academy grounds. Outside the academy, Michael would rather have nothing to do with him. So yes, what Michael wanted was to escape. Not only escape, but escape from Arven as well. But for now, he could only wait for an opportunity. Michael did not move. His body remained limp in Selim's grasp, breathing shallow and steady, presence dulled to the point of near absence. Whatever chaos unfolded around them, none of it touched him. The pressure field Selim maintained was absolute, layers of controlled force diverting every stray ripple of energy away from where Michael hung suspended. Blades of compressed air passed overhead. Fire and ice shattered against invisible barriers before they could even graze him. If not for Arven's interference, Selim might have caught on that his unconscious victim was not so unconscious again. It helped that he was good at this too. As a necromancer who had spent most of his time around corpses since gaining his powers, Michael was quite good at playing dead. The fight resumed in full when Arven caught up. And while the titans collided, Michael waited. The clash intensified. Air howled as Selim pressed harder. Arven responded in kind. The exchange was violent enough to scar the sky, yet strangely restrained. It was obvious why. Arven did not push all the way. No matter how wildly his manifestations moved, every attack curved subtly away from Michael's position. Selim noticed. His eyes narrowed, calculations snapping into place as he felt the limits Arven imposed on himself. The director could escalate further. He simply chose not to, and that hesitation created openings. Selim took them. The pressure thickened around Michael. Selim shifted his stance, using Michael's position as a fixed point, forcing Arven to divide his attention with every exchange. Each time Arven adjusted to avoid collateral damage, Selim struck. The battlefield shook under the strain, and through it all, Michael remained untouched. The mad Arven moved first. Fire tore through the air as a spiraling mass of flames condensed around his arm, then detonated forward in a brutal arc, the heat warping the sky itself. Selim reacted instantly. The air before him compressed into layered walls, each one collapsing just as the fire struck. The impact boomed, sending shockwaves rippling across the clouds below as both men were hurled backward, still airborne. Selim recovered faster. He pivoted in midair. His hand rose and twisted, fingers closing as if gripping the sky itself. The air between them compressed, then snapped forward in layered crescents that tore through space in staggered waves. The mad Arven howled with laughter and charged straight through them. Flames wrapped around his body like living armor. Each crescent struck, collapsed, and detonated against the fire, shredding layers of heat but never fully dispersing it. Arven punched through the last wave and swung, a burning fist trailing a vortex of fire that spiraled outward like a drill. Selim did not block. He vanished sideways, the blow passing where his head had been an instant earlier. The fire vortex continued on, ripping a glowing scar across the sky before dissipating. Selim reappeared higher, already moving again, palm thrust forward. The air detonated. A concentrated lance of pressure screamed downward, slamming into the mad Arven's shoulder and driving him off balance. Fire exploded outward as Arven spun, barely stabilizing himself with a violent burst that sent him rocketing upward again. They never stopped moving. Then the trembling Arven moved. Cold surged outward in a wide radius, frost blooming through the air itself. Selim felt the emotional weight hit again, a wave of dread riding the temperature drop. He adjusted instantly. The pressure around Michael thickened further, isolating him completely, while Selim angled his retreat upward to escape the worst of the influence. The cold followed as a creeping field that spread through space, slowing the air itself. The vacant Arven lifted his hand. The hollow corridor snapped open beneath Selim's feet, space thinning and pulling him downward in a sudden silent drag. Selim twisted mid-fall, detonating pressure outward to rupture the corridor before it could fully form. The pull broke, but not cleanly. His trajectory shifted, dropping him closer than he wanted. The mad Arven was already there. Fire crashed into him like a meteor. Selim crossed his arms and released pressure in a violent burst, blasting the fire apart at point-blank range. The explosion sent both of them tumbling in opposite directions, spiraling through smoke and distortion. Selim stabilized first. He forced distance again. The cold Arven raised his hand. The air stilled. Selim felt resistance immediately. He compensated by increasing output of raw power. The stillness pressed harder, flattening the space between them into a dull, stubborn resistance. Selim shifted his angle again, refusing to let the distance collapse. And then it happened. At the edge of Selim's pressure field, Michael moved. Raw strength surged outward from him in a violent burst, and the pressure that had held him like a cradle cracked. For a heartbeat, Michael's body fought against the invisible force surrounding him, muscles tightening as if he were tearing through chains. Selim's head snapped toward him, shock flashing across his face for the first time. "Come back!" Selim shouted, rage ripping through the sky. Michael did not listen. He ripped himself free completely. The moment his feet found air, he exploded forward, speed turning, into a sonic boom that cracked the sky open. A ring of compressed sound expanded behind him as he shot away, a streak of motion vanishing into the distance. Even Arven froze. All five of him paused at once. Then everyone reacted. Selim moved first, pressure snapping beneath his feet as he launched after Michael like a storm. Arven followed an instant later, the four manifestations scattering into the sky. Far ahead, Michael kept running. Michael felt it before he saw it. The air screamed as Selim closed the gap in a single violent surge, distance collapsing faster than Michael had expected. Too close. Michael's eyes sharpened. His instincts did not hesitate. Just as Selim's fingers stretched forward, Michael activated his law. There was no light, no sound, no dramatic surge of energy. For a single heartbeat, it felt as if something mysterious had opened, its eyes inside him. Wisdom. Michael's perception sharpened beyond clarity. The world slowed. Then he moved. There was no sonic boom this time. No explosion of sound or pressure. Michael simply vanished. Selim's hand closed on nothing. His eyes widened. "What?" Selim muttered in shock. Michael was already far ahead. Selim reacted instantly. Pressure thundered outward beneath his feet as he surged forward. Again, output spiking sharply. The sky screamed in protest as he forced distance to collapse by sheer power alone. "Boy! Running away now is a nation crime. Come back if you don't want to implicate yourself." Michael ignored Selim's words and just focused on increasing the distance. For a while, 3 groups of individuals made a circle around the world on the 15th floor of hell. A few seconds later, Michael felt it. Presence. It slid into existence beside him with impossible smoothness, as if it had always been there. Arven, the original. He matched Michael's speed effortlessly, walking through the sky as if velocity itself meant nothing. His hands were in his pockets. His coat did not flutter. His eyes were calm, sharp, and very awake. Michael's heart slammed. Too close. Way too close. Arven's hand came out of his pocket and stretched toward his shoulder. It was obvious what his intentions were. Michael did not hesitate. Space. The world folded and Michael disappeared.